If last week's trial, the O.J. Simpson case, was the trial of the century, then this week's trial, the Casey Anthony case, was probably the social media trial of the century. No case was covered like this in the past. And welcome to the stage, Jose Baez, a lawyer who had been trained in the Miami Public Defender's Office, but to this point had been really an unknown lawyer on the national stage, gets the biggest case perhaps ever with the media coverage and so on. And you'll hear from Jose himself how he was criticized for his defense of Casey Anthony, who was accused of killing her daughter, Kaylee Anthony. The trial lasted 6 weeks. There were so many problems for the defense that Jose had to deal with. How was he going to explain Casey Anthony lying about her daughter? How was he going to explain all of the terrible, terrible facts surrounding the case? And you'll hear how he did that and why he was subject to such criticism, and ultimately why he was so successful in this case and his other cases. You'll hear from Jose Baez in For the Defense next. I'm David Oscar Marcus. Thanks for listening. I'm really excited today. We have one of the all-time great trial lawyers, Jose Baez, a fellow Miamian, joining me on the podcast. And he's represented and tried some of the biggest cases in America. Aaron Hernandez, Casey Anthony, some of the fraud cases in New York. He's represented Harvey Weinstein. It's an amazing list of cases that Jose has had, and I'm really feeling lucky to get to talk to him today. So welcome, Jose, to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
So I wanted to talk to you to start out about the case that sort of put you on the map, the Casey Anthony case. How did you get that case? But when you got it, I don't think it was hitting all the headlines and everything like that to start out, was it?
Not really. And there's a couple of interesting tidbits about that that I'll share with you. But the way I landed the case is, just so you know, as you mentioned, I'm from Miami, and I had moved to Orlando. And one of the reasons I opened up shop in Orlando was there were not that many Hispanic lawyers. So I found it fairly easy to get Hispanic clients there, and it was a great business builder for me. And before you knew it, I built up a pretty decent reputation in the Puerto Rican community. And the day Casey got arrested, she was in lockup, and she asked a couple Puerto Rican girls who they recommended, and they gave her my name.
So funny.
So the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. It's important to have good reputations in the jail. When I was a public defender, the day that I left the public defender's office, I told all my clients in jail, tell everybody about me. I gave them each like 5 cards, and that's how I started my business.
Yeah, no. You know, it's like, why do you rob banks? Because the money's there. Well, if you want clients, the jail is where the clients are.
So funny.
And what's interesting is my office was right next door to the jail, and there was not an attorney's office for, I guess, 2 miles from the jail, and I was the only one that had a little shack there next to the jail. But the phone kept ringing. So
yeah, that's amazing. And when you take a case like that, Jose, I'm sure you had no idea what you were getting into.
Well, what's funny is when the very first day that I was on the case, I spoke to a friend of mine who was a reporter for Telemundo, and she was like, yeah, you should come out here. All the news crews are outside the home. I hadn't spoken to her parents yet. Only on the phone. And when I finally, they had invited me to the house, and I wasn't going to go. And then I thought to myself, it might be good to go there, and, I'm sure the news will pick it up, and I might be able to put something on the website. That's literally how I went into thinking this was going to go. I didn't have any idea that 3 days later, 2020 and People magazine would be in my office lobby waiting to talk to me.
Right. And so how do you deal with the onslaught of press? Now you're an old pro at it, but at the time, I mean, dealing with press like that is unheard of and a skill by itself. It's different than trying cases or landing cases. Dealing with the press is a whole different skill.
Right. Well, I can tell you this. Casey's case was much, much more different than any other high profile case I've ever handled. So, for example, the Weinstein case, it had a lot of press, a lot of international press, but I was left alone 99% of the time, with the exception of my court appearances, where you would have everybody congregate right there. That was no such thing with Casey's case, because at the time, Kaylee was missing, and it was an ongoing story. So I would pull up to my office. There would be dozens of film crews right there filming me get out of my car and walk into my office. I mean, that's the nonsense that it was constant. It was.
So you had to be on 24/7. You had to be on.
Yes. It was literally 24/7. If she ordered Skittles from the commissary, it made the news. Every single move was made. I literally, I could only think of maybe O.J. Simpson's murder trial back in 94, 95 that rivaled this type of publicity. It was unlike anything I've ever seen since, and I've handled some big ones after.
Right. And so like the Harvey Weinstein, Aaron Hernandez, probably as big as that was, the press also, it's not an everyday thing.
No, in the office, we called those Casey Light. they were literally nothing. And I guess if it's baptism by fire with the media. And when you learn you learn the ins and outs, the tricks of the trade and the things that they do, and you build relationships, you know who you can trust, who you can't trust. And unfortunately, you have to learn the hard way. And when we had a client like Casey, where she was relatively indigent, it was the media. It was one of those situations where we had to have a relationship with, because it provided all types of intel. And I can tell you, if it weren't for the media, Casey Anthony would not have been acquitted. So
it's fascinating. So I had not thought about that. I, of course, was coming into this interview thinking to ask you about how do you do a first degree murder case where somebody's, relatively indigent, as you say, but I had not thought of the help that you got from the media in cracking the case.
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples of that. First, we were able to license photographs of Casey and Kaylee to a news network, and we were given $200,000 for that. So that really funded a lot of her costs and legal fees. Everybody thinks I did it pro bono, and that's not the case. That was even back then, that was a decent payday.
Absolutely.
So, and we were able to do a lot with that. And when we needed a jury consultant, we did it through 48 hours, where we were allowed them to film part of the focus group so long as they held it until later on down the road when it was okay. And our jury consultant did not disclose anything related to the defense. There's that. And then there was intel on witnesses. They went, we built relationships with the right reporters and sent them to go run out ground balls. And before you knew it, it was the media who found Crystal Holloway, which was George Anthony's mistress, who ended up testifying that he knew prior to Kaylee being found that it was an accident that snowballed out of control. So that was huge for us, as well as the information and intel on Roy Kronk, the meter reader. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but those are just a couple of examples of how the media can be your enemy and your friend at the same time.
Right. And it's so interesting to me that the media was willing to fund certain things like the focus groups, because people don't realize, like, doing a focus group, one focus group can cost you between 40 and 50,000 just to do that. So to be able to have the resources to do a focus group in a case like this it's really priceless.
It's totally priceless. And I'll tell you something else. It was very helpful because I got to focus on evidence that prospective jurors found to be extremely important, and kind of take my foot off the gas of things that they didn't find so important. Like, for example, I thought for sure the canine evidence was going to harm us, and they could really care less. They were more focused on the computer evidence. And later on, on the 11th hour, I did a shift and started focusing more on that evidence than I did the canine evidence. So, and here's the craziness: when they voted for the focus group, the very first vote and the only vote that they ended up voting, it was 10-2 in favor of acquittal, and that was the same exact first vote for the real jury.
Interesting. And when you do, by the way, before we get into it, just so everybody knows, can you tell them what the canine evidence was and what the computer evidence was, just so they know?
Sure. There had been, as it relates to the canine evidence, there was a dog the cadaver dog who had hit or given an indication near the trunk of Casey's car, and then also in the backyard. So we were able to really focus on, one, how they went about doing the actual lineup for the car, which was non-existent, heavily flawed, as well as how they had different dogs that did not hit in the backyard, and this one did. And the same dog who hit on the backyard did not hit where Kaylee's body was actually found. So, we were able to point out major weaknesses in canine evidence. And it's funny. People go in with different impressions. Like, I've always had this belief that a lot of people pay and put a lot of weight into canine evidence, but it turned out that given the overall picture of things, it wasn't as much weight as I thought they were going to give to it. So as it relates to the computer evidence, there were searches for chloroform and how to make chloroform. And those were things that we had to show the reason behind those searches. For example, one of Casey's boyfriends, one of the guys she was dating at the time, had posted a photograph of a guy in a tuxedo putting his arm around a girl at the dinner table in a very fine dining type establishment. And he had his arm around her with a rag, and it said, "Win her over with chloroform." So our position was, Casey saw this picture and didn't know what chloroform was and started researching chloroform. And that's how we were able to attack that piece of evidence, as well as some other flaws that the government had utilized, where they totally screwed up the computer evidence. They literally didn't know what they were doing, and we capitalized off of that.
Jose, there's so many different strands to the case. I find it so interesting how much you had to do in people think, oh, first degree murder case, there's no documents. It's just a question of who did it, but each piece of evidence has to be examined. And so, you can't do a case like this on your own. You put together a team. In this case, you had Cheney Mason. In some of your other cases, you've worked with Ron Sullivan. How do you decide, how to put this team together? Who's going to be on the team? I'm sure people are always clamoring to work with you on these cases. How do you put it together?
Well, the first thing I look for people who have skills that I do not have. I think that's incredibly important. You don't want another you on the team. You want somebody very different than you to be able to not only balance you out and complement you, but to sometimes point out when you're wrong. And when I work in a very team type environment. And yes, I'm calling the shots. I may be the quarterback, but I'm going to listen to what everyone has to say before I make my decisions. And one of the important things, like for example, with Cheney, it was easy because I was not really a local in Orlando, and I needed some home cooking.
Right.
So Cheney was an established lawyer in that town, and he really did finesse the prosecutors and the judge a lot more than I would have been. I walked in there like Rodney Dangerfield, having no respect. You know,
it's funny you say that because Miami lawyers, people think everybody loves Miami lawyers in Florida. Miami lawyers are only liked in Miami. I mean, if you go to Broward, Orlando, Tallahassee, the judges there do not like Miami lawyers, and I don't know why, but it's true. You need, as you say, home cooking when you go to these other places in Florida.
Absolutely. And let me tell you something. The reason they hate Miami lawyers is because they're so talented and they're fighters. And that's the bottom line. I cannot tell you how disgusted I was with the local bar. I was not only fighting the prosecutors and the police. I was fighting the local bar, who every twist and turn, I had to deal with another defense lawyer, either pulling something shady with one of the witnesses. I mean, I literally had one local bar member take me to lunch and say, you know what, I'll help you out, but only if you plead her. I'll help you plead her out. Jeez. And I'm like, yeah, just stuff like that. I had another one tell me, I don't know what you're doing on that case. You need to just get rid of it. I wouldn't take it. There's no way. When it came to support from the local bar, it was non-existent. And I'll tell you, I'll take it a step further. There was one local guy who was so anti-defense, who was a criminal defense lawyer, that he was the reason when Casey got acquitted, he had written to the prior judge to basically point out that she should still be on probation. And the judge listened to this lawyer and recalled her back so she could serve probation.
Wow.
Why?
Why do these guys care so much? Is it that they're so used to just pleading and everybody getting along? And like you say, the Miami lawyers are fighters. Is that what it is? Because there's got to be more to it. Jealousy. I don't know what it is.
You know what? I don't want to say it's jealousy, but I'm left without an alternative because I would never get that treatment in Miami. Here in Miami, there's a camaraderie. If one lawyer needs help, there's always 5 in line ready to lend a helping hand, even if they don't get any exposure on the case or get any, I just cannot. It's funny. I was listening to one of your prior podcasts, and you mentioned Vinny Flynn.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, one day I was in the courtroom as a public defender, and Vinny walked in. I didn't know him from anywhere. And he was arguing a point that I had a good case on. And I walked up to him and I handed him the case, and I explained to him what this case was about. And he argued it, got his client off probation as a result of it. And that's the way I was taught. That's the way I was taught to do. And later on, I got a bottle of wine from Vinny thanking me, and that's just the way we roll down here. And I don't get Orlando lawyers and other jurisdictions where there's no camaraderie.
After I did that podcast and mentioned Vinny, he sent me an email talking about it's not the same as it was when he was practicing. There's too many snitch lawyers. There's too many lawyers who run to the courthouse to sell out their clients and their comrades, and he just doesn't like it anymore. And I was sad to see that email from him because he was such a great guy and such a great fighter.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he doesn't even remember that incident, but I do, and I'll forever remember it. And he's right, and that's where I learned with my firm. We do not represent snitches. We never have. We never will. And I thank God every day that we're successful. We can hand back a check. We don't need that kind of money.
It's great. And so, you spoke about the public defender's office in Miami. Is that, people, in prior podcasts have said, are you, no, not you, but are trial lawyers born or are they taught? I've always thought it's a little of both. What about you? Did you learn in the PD's office? Is that where you learned how to be a great trial lawyer?
I would say it's a little bit of both as well. I learned the nuts and bolts of who I am today as a lawyer all came from my experience and my teaching at the public defender's office. I was surrounded by amazing lawyers who taught me to fight, taught me to bring the fight to them, and to never say die, and really go all out for your clients. I learned that culture, fortunately, early on in my career, and it stuck with me throughout. I'm molded already. They molded me.
Right.
And you can't count the numbers of lawyers, of great lawyers that have come out of that office. And I'm very proud to be an alumni of that place. And to this day, whenever they call me and ask me for something or to come speak or to lend a helping hand, I'm the first one to stand up.
Let's hear how Jose uses all of those lessons from the public defender's office in For the Defense next. So I'm going to do something a little different in these cut-ins because we're so lucky to have the openings, closings, and cross-examinations from Jose's trial with Casey Anthony as it was televised. So what I'm going to do is play a clip of Jose's opening here where he lays out the theory of defense. Despite the enormous amount of criticism that Jose got, this was exactly the reason that he won the case. Check out Jose Baez in For the Defense next.
How in the world can a mother wait 30 days before ever reporting her child missing? It's insane. It's bizarre. Something's just not right about that. Well, the answer is actually relatively simple. She never was missing. Kaylee Anthony died on June 16, 2008, when she drowned in her family's swimming pool. And that's what this case is going to be about. You're going to hear all kinds of interesting behavior from all parties, not just Casey. And once you see some of this behavior, you'll realize that the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. We are what we are because of who brought us into this world and how we were raised. Casey was raised to lie. This child, who at 8 years old, learned to lie immediately. She could be 13 years old, have her father's penis in her mouth, and then go to school and play with the other kids as if nothing ever happened. Nothing's wrong. That will help you understand why no one knew that her child was dead. That's the most important thing you must keep in the back of your mind, is that sex abuse does things to us. It changes you. When you go back home and you're back in Clearwater and you're sitting around the dinner table and someone says to you, "Why did you find Casey Anthony not guilty?" You're going to say, "Well, I was fed a wealth of information, like a V. All this information came, but it all boiled down to one thing. They couldn't tell me how she died."
So back to the trial for a second. You have this, you do the jury focus groups, you have a jury consultant, you're getting ready for the biggest trial, if not ever, in a very, very long time. What kind of jury are you looking for? You're representing a young mom who's accused of killing her kid. What kind of jury do you try to get?
We wanted smart jurors, and we had a very educated jury. I think all but one had college degrees. We wanted people who were going to question the evidence, not just take things at face value. And I don't know if you know this, but this was a change of venue case. We actually picked the jury in St. Petersburg, and we brought them to Orlando and sequestered them in Orlando. So I can tell you, I learned so much from that case. It was a college degree in all of the things that could possibly happened, and you had to learn it. I can go on and practice for another 60 years, and I'll never learn or have the experiences that I had in that case.
One of the things that you taught defense lawyers, and something that I think defense lawyers forget, is that in an opening statement, it's the only time that the defense gets to go last. So, the prosecution doesn't get to respond. You get the last word. And you gave an opening statement where you were taking it to them. You were aggressive. You said two things in particular that jumped off the page. One, that the baby drowned in the pool, and second, that Casey was sexually abused. And, you took a lot of heat for it. I went back and listened to the Nancy Grace that evening after your opening. I mean, you talk about Orlando defense lawyers across the country were going after you. And I had to just smile watching this thing because they don't get it. And they didn't understand how important it is to come out with a theory and explain the theory forcefully and not rely on all this wishy-washy stuff in opening.
I'll tell you, it's amazing because I caught so much heat for my opening statement from anyone and everyone who had an opinion, and that was everyone. And they were basically people who've never tried a case before, and I was scratching my head. They were basically saying that I committed her to testify and that I made statements that I couldn't prove, and all of these things. And none of them got it. I in your prior podcast with H.D. Smith, he mentioned the opening is when you have their attention the most. I couldn't agree with that more. I knew that the opening was going to set the tone for the entire trial, and I had to come out swinging. And here's the thing: you never do know whether your client is going to testify.
Right.
They don't have to. You're going to tell them not to, and that you'll fight them and drag, kick, and scream if they ever try to. But at the end of the day, that's their choice, and there's nothing you can do about that. So in light of all of that, I had to come out and lay out what our theory of the defense was, because what happened? Are you saying I'm not going to throw that out there so that way the jury doesn't understand the context? And then if Casey, who had a very strong personality, if she had not listened to me and not followed my advice, she would have gotten up there. And while I'm glad she did listen to me, those are things that as a defense lawyer you don't have control over. So you really have to make that call as to whether you're going to throw out there your theory of defense, and if so, how much. And I thought it was my personal belief that I needed to lay it all out there, including the abuse. And everybody gave me a lot of flack for what they call not proving it. And I don't know where they went to law school, because where I went, they told you didn't have a burden of proof.
That's right. You don't. And the government has the burden to disprove those things. And the jury instruction on reasonable doubt is very good. And I think one thing that people don't realize either, even judges sometimes have a hard time with this, but you can cross-examine the state's witness on your theory, and the jury can either believe or disbelieve that witness. I mean, the state called the dad as the first witness. They almost fell right into your trap. And you can question him on those things.
David, you hit the nail right on the head. In fact, Judge Perry, he basically precluded me from arguing the sexual abuse in closing arguments because he said we didn't prove it. And I explained to him, I'm like, wait a minute. I questioned him about it. And yes, he denied it, but the jury can disbelieve him just like they can disbelieve the accused.
That's right.
If the accused got up there and denied it.
That's right.
So where in the world are you getting this double standard? I completely disagree with Judge Perry's ruling on that. and and of course the media and everybody said they didn't prove anything or whatever. But it's interesting how they called George Anthony, and that was really a unique situation because I had never experienced that, where they called him for limited purposes at different phases of the trial. So when I got up there initially, I was going to go at it with him, and the judge kept shutting me down because it's beyond the scope of direct examination, beyond the scope. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I even had case law that stated you can go past it so long as it's related to the theory of your defense. But this judge was not giving me an inch. So it ended up working out to my benefit because the more he got up there, little by little, he started looking less credible. And I held back on the abuse allegations till the very end. And by that time, all these jurors, in my opinion, thought he was a liar. So the second I asked him about the abuse and started going into the abuse with him, while he denied it, I don't think they believed him.
Pretty clear they didn't.
So,
and I think it was such a mistake for the prosecution to do it the way they did it. They made their case by calling him throughout their case about him, which is exactly what you wanted to happen. It just seems like they made such a tactical error there.
Yeah. So there are. I keep citing history here, but Albert Krieger used to say, a prosecutor is going to stick to their theory of their case, and it doesn't matter if their own mother is telling them it's the opposite. They're still moving forward. And that's the truth. Prosecutors, once they dig their hole, they don't get out of it, and they don't adjust to the defense at all. And this prosecution team knew what our defense was going to be before the trial. They didn't know how we were going to, throw it down, but they knew it was coming.
How did they know?
And there were some mitigation issues as it related to mental health experts testifying, because we wanted some mental health experts to testify, and that was a whole big debate between us. So we went in chambers, and the judge asked us, well, if you want to admit this expert to talk about what Casey told them without Casey testifying, I'm going to need to hear it. And we had to basically let them know where our case was going.
I see.
And this was about 2 or 3 weeks before the trial.
When you go after a family member like that, you have to get your client on board for doing such a thing. They have to buy in. Was that difficult for Casey to do? I imagine it was, to get her on board to accuse her father like that.
Well, I really can't dive into too much of what Casey was saying. But I can tell you this, if it's my child, I'm listening to what her lawyer has to say.
Right.
And not that I ever expected any of the family members to lie. I just felt they were lying all the way from the very beginning. And early on in the case, I'll never forget, I was sitting in the Anthony family's living room, and this is when early in the case, well, we didn't know where Kaylee was or anything like that. And the mother Cindy Anthony was adamant about Casey's hiding something. Why is she keeping Kaylee from us? Because they thought, maybe I should say, thought 100% that Kaylee was still alive. George was always quiet. He was always quiet and in the corner. He was that guy that you show up to the house, he's offering you water. Can I get you water? He would get up. Can I get you some chips? He wouldn't sit down and stay still. Mm. And then I said, and she basically threw it out there and said, why would she hide Kaylee from us? And I just, I said, well, it's probably, maybe to protect her. I mean, and then Cindy was like, but what in the world would make, her think she needs a protector from us? And I go, I mean, just imagine if there were, abuse or sexual abuse or something like that. And when I threw it out there like that, I meant it like just literally as an example. I didn't mean it that was what was going on in the situation. I'll never forget how silent the room dropped. And it was all of the Anthonys in the house, including Lee Anthony, who was there. Mm. And that was the first time my eyebrows raised, like, whoa, these people are not reacting to something outrageous like that.
It's really, really crazy.
It was weird. It was weird. And then we started uncovering things like they hid Casey's pregnancy for it wasn't until she was 7.5 months pregnant before she went to the doctor. And she was clearly showing. And the Anthony family was telling people, no, she's just gaining weight. No, she's, and it was just bizarre. George Anthony was in the delivery room when Kaylee was born. I have a daughter myself. There's no way in the world you're getting me in the delivery room. It's just a little weird. The whole situation was just odd. And I knew that in order for us to win this case, we were going to have to show just how odd these people are. And I think that's what won the case, to be honest with you. I think it was, as I mentioned in my opening statement, it was a very common accident that happened to a very uncommon group of people.
Right.
And they got a front row seat thanks to the prosecution because they kept calling the Anthonys back and forth and back and forth.
The jury had a front row seat to the trial. You have a front row seat to Jose's strategy, and we'll continue in For the Defense next. In the last cut-in, you heard Jose's opening. In this one, I'd like to share the cross-examination of George Anthony that Jose was just speaking about.
In late January of 2009, you attempted to commit suicide. Did you, sir?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you even left a suicide note.
Yes, sir, I did.
And you expressed some guilt. Do you recall being on 48 Hours?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall being paid $20,000 for that appearance?
Mr. Baez, I have been nice to you. I have tried to answer every question to the best of my ability. And for what my wife and I might have retained from a news organization to bring awareness of my granddaughter, my daughter, and other missing children, that's what that article was exactly about. It had nothing to do with guilt or innocence or anything like that. We did that, sir, for self-preservation, to bring awareness for our children, for not only my granddaughter, because of how beautiful she was, and the life that she meant to us.
I'm going to object to the narrative, Judge. Non-responsive. All of these media appearances stopped when the allegations of abuse came up, correct?
I believe that, sir, was done through you, sir.
Sir, you recall finding out another way?
Objection. Relevant. Please let me answer this.
You don't recall being asked by Mr. Ashton if you had ever molested your daughter?
You have to be specific, sir, when that might have happened, could have happened. You're not being specific, sir.
First day of trial. You were asked.
And a question, yes, sir, and I never would do anything like that to my daughter.
Okay. You know, of course, that sex with a child under the age of 12 years old is life in prison, don't you, sir?
Relevance.
Sustain.
You're aware of the possible penalties of child molesting, don't you, sir?
Objection. Relevance.
Sustain.
You, of course, would never admit to molesting your child, would you, sir?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled. He can ask the question if he can.
Sir, I never would do anything like that to my daughter.
My question is, you would never admit to it, would you, sir?
Sir, I would never do anything to harm my daughter in that way.
Only in that way.
Objection.
You know, Jose, every night on the news, I mean, forget about being attacked. Your client was just being convicted every night in the news. Do you go home after trial and watch it and shake your head, or do you not watch the news during a trial like this? What do you do?
No, I didn't watch the news. I had seen enough prior to that, and I knew it was going on. And I'm a big believer. You know, I get so bothered when I see lawyers they go try a case and they walk out of the courtroom and they start granting interviews at night. I cannot understand what they're doing to prepare for the next day.
Right.
It shocks me. It shocks me. And I have never done that. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a good look for the client. So no, I was adamant about that. And even when clients want you to go out there, it would have to be a unique set of circumstances for me to ever do that.
And now that you've dealt with so many different press cases, I mean, I guess when you come to an Aaron Hernandez case after Casey Anthony or Weinstein, you sort of have the way you do things with the press. And it seems like they've almost come to have a working relationship with you where they, you know, that wasn't really there in the Casey Anthony case.
Well, you know, over time now, Casey's case was 3 years long. So,
right.
And it was every day of coverage. So I couldn't help but I guess, veer towards certain reporters who I trusted and thought were more credible than others. So, you know, like I said earlier, it's a learning experience. Relationships are great when you have them, but they have to know it's going to be a one-way relationship. It's a one-way street, and the day I need something or want something, I'll give it to you. But you know, don't expect anything in return. And many of them are okay with that. And if they're okay with that, they usually end up getting scoops and stories ahead of their colleagues anyway.
Right. You mentioned that the case went on for 3 years. I don't think people realize that Casey Anthony is in prison for these 3 years waiting for trial. And, you know, how difficult it is to get ready for a trial when your client is at the jail. You can't just call them up and have a call about doing X or so. You have to go over there and, you know, leave your cell phone back at the office. It takes all day. It's an enormous burden to have a client that's in custody.
Yeah. And you know, what I would do is I would work all day. I would go see her at night. And of course, you know, the press made a big deal out of that. Mm-hmm. But that's just the way, you know, I had other cases that I needed to keep my business open. And that was a struggle. It was right around the time of the financial crisis. So it was really a struggle to keep the lights on and to keep business afloat. So I was working twice as hard and, you know, 15, 16-hour days. And then I'd go see her and we go over what was covered and, you know, you grind through it.
Because people don't realize, you know, you have to keep a practice going when you have a case like this. If this was your only case, you'd go out of business in 2 seconds. And so you have other clients and other things you need to deal with. People don't understand the real business of the law, which is impossible sometimes.
Right. No, and I lost a lot of business because everybody thought, oh, he's too busy with that case. He doesn't have time for my case.
Right.
And, you know, that's just not the way it works. You need multiple cases to keep a business open and to pay employees and rent and things like that. So
of course it paid off in the end.
It was a challenge.
It paid off in the end because when you win, you get a ton of work.
You know, it did, but I'll be honest with you. Business did not pick up for a while, for like a year or two after.
That's strange. What do you make of that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what? I think it was probably people did not want to be associated with
Right.
Casey.
Right.
You know, because so and so hired Casey Anthony's lawyers. The first thing the news would say. Well, I don't want to be associated with Casey Anthony, even though she's walking free and you know had a good lawyer. It doesn't matter. I'll get convicted and not be associated with her. I guess that was you know, I don't know. I really, but it took a while. And, you know, so I was determined, you know, it was early on in my legal career that I took that case. And I still felt, and I still feel today, I have many more cases in front of me. And the last thing I want to do is be, you know, defined by one case, because, you know, my growth is continuous. And I think as a trial lawyer, you have to continue to reinvent yourself. I make it a point to try something new with every single case I try. And doesn't mean you don't stick to what works.
Right.
And, you know, you keep your strengths, but you always try to evolve. And I'm nothing like I can honestly say when I self-evaluate myself is I'm nothing like I was back then. I think there are new aspects that I've learned and from other cases and other experiences.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. I think, well, for example, now I have an extensive white collar practice, and I've had to learn usually early part of my career, you're representing the poor underdog.
Right.
Well, when you start representing billionaires and people who are wealthy, the arguments aren't the same.
That's right. That's right.
So, but I always say, you know, because I caught when I first started doing white collar, like Bloomberg and all of these other financial outlets would be like, well, what do you know about white collar cases? You handle murder cases. And my response is there's no such thing as a white collar jury.
That's right. That's very good. That's very good.
I don't care what you say. You're going to get the same group of people, and you have to learn to always try your case to your audience.
Right.
And when you represent a different, I don't want to call them class, but a different socioeconomic group or type of client, you have to basically take on their world. I had last summer a $1 billion fraud case in Brooklyn where I was representing Orthodox Jews. And I grew up in Miami, and while there's the extensive Jewish community here, I had no idea. I was never exposed to that community. And I have to tell you now, after having been, I absolutely love them. They took me in as one of their own. It was an amazing experience to see a different culture, a different religion, and how committed they are to their principles. And I incorporated a lot of that into the case. And you know, I think as the voice of your client, you have to take on certain things. I never forget. I had like 3 parts of my closing arguments where I'm quoting. I'm basically saying I'm speaking in Yiddish. That they had picked up in the trial.
Oy vey, Jose. you know, the Hispanic communities and Jewish communities have always been very close.
Yes, I'm aware of that. But I mean, I to be honest with you, when it comes to Brooklyn Orthodox Jews, I had no idea what that world was about. But I mean, I absolutely love them. My client and his family were amazing people. His extended family, the community, the rabbis would come. Every time I call my client, he doesn't answer the phone and says, "Hey, Jose." His first response is, "Yes, Rabbi."
It's great.
So,
it's great.
I mean, you know, I could go 6 months without calling him, and the first words out of his mouth are, "Yes, Rabbi."
That's what. That's your new nickname with me. I'm going to start calling you Rabbi Baez. So, and you walked him. I mean, that's another case that you know you got to not guilty at. And I don't think people realize, and this is part of the greatness of coming out of the public defender's office, just to circle back, is, there isn't just a murder criminal defense lawyer or a white collar criminal defense lawyer. The best criminal defense lawyers are people who can try a murder case one week and a white collar case the next week and a rape case the next week. You have to be able to speak to juries. As you say, those are the best trial lawyers.
Yes, and even civil cases. I mean, I've been very lucky to try some civil rights cases, some other wrongful death cases, and the rules are slightly different, but the heart of the cases are the same, and that is being a storyteller, being able to capture an audience, to keep them with you, to understand and know what they're looking for. And that's one thing that when it comes to juries, I try to involve them in every aspect of the case. And I try to keep a dialogue between the jurors, even though they can't speak to me. Right. I do my best to find nonverbal cues, and different things like that. And like, for example, it's even as simple as when you're questioning a witness, you can turn to them and say, explain to us. And, right. So the witness is talking to not only the jury, but to myself, or tell the jury what you mean by that, or different things like that, where you incorporate them and they appreciate it, because being a juror is really the worst job in the world, because you can't speak. You have to sit there for 8 hours. You need to raise your hand if you got to go to the bathroom. Yeah. You have nothing in common with the people who you're there with, and the only thing you do have in common, you can't talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to always be cognizant of your audience, and I think to be a great trial lawyer, one of the things that I'm always aspiring to do is connect with the jury, connect with them, figure out what it is they need, what it is they're looking for in the case, and deliver it to them as best you can.
And in Casey Anthony's case, didn't you feel that they were looking to hear from her and wanted to hear from her? I mean, here you come out in opening and make these claims, and then you end up not calling her. That must have been a very difficult decision.
Not really, because they did hear from her. They heard all of the lies.
Right.
And I think when you tell that many lies, while we had my whole case was explaining those lies away. Yeah. And giving the jury that, explain this is the reason. And I did it. I knew I could do it a lot better than she could, because they would already be looking at her as a liar. So when, in light of that, the prosecution played tons of jailhouse tapes, audio recordings, phone calls, different things. So they got to hear plenty from Casey Anthony. What they didn't hear was why she was saying these things. And that's what I was delivering to them day in and day out. So by the time the end of the trial came, really, there's nothing for you to say.
Yeah.
There's nothing for you to say. You lied. You're a liar. We have to own that, but we have to tell people why you lied. And being a liar is not being a murderer.
Right. So, switching to the closing for a second, I have to say my favorite moment of the closing was when you were
I know where you're going.
You were up there and Ashton starts laughing. And you called him out on it. And it was perfect because, I don't think people realize, like you say, you have to involve the jury and speak to the jury. The jury saw him laughing, so you could either ignore it and then the jury's going to have to decide for themselves what's going on, or you could call him out on it, and you called him out on it. And it was perfect, I thought. The judge got pissed, but you're not playing to the judge, you're playing to the jury.
Well, you don't know why he got pissed. So here, let me tell you the backstory there.
Yeah.
He had been laughing ever since the opening statements. So he thought my opening was just the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And every time during witnesses' testimony or the defense case, he was having a grand old time over there by himself, cracking jokes. He made all kinds of jokes during cross-examination, all very inappropriate. Talk about a guy who's not self-aware.
Yeah.
that, this is a baby murder case. You're talking about a child. And I will never forget at one time he was questioning our entomologist who had done a study using a pig. And he asked, "Did you wrap your pigs in a blanket?" Ha 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 ha, like thinking it was funny.
Ugh.
And I didn't find that funny at all.
Brutal.
I didn't find anything in this case funny. And the jury didn't either.
Mm-hmm.
And so okay, he was a very cocky lawyer, a good lawyer, nonetheless, a fierce advocate and someone that needed to be respected, but he was just not very self-aware. And I had told the judge repeatedly. There was one point where the judge threatened to throw him off because of some of his behavior. But the judge kept saying to me, "I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it." I go, "He was just laughing 2 minutes ago." He goes, "I didn't see him."
Ugh.
So when I got up there, I'm like, "Okay, you're going to see him now because I'm going to point it out to you."
It's like in the basketball game when the first guy commits the foul and the second guy gets caught for clocking him.
Yeah, exactly. So that whole thing was, it was going to happen. And it was really weird because I'll never forget, I saw him out of the side of my eye. And if you ever watch that tape closely, you'll see I glance over there for a second, and it just happened to step into what I was arguing at the time about a witness. It was George Anthony. And I said, it doesn't matter who's asking him the questions, whether it's me or this laughing guy right here. And it flowed.
Yeah.
I couldn't have planned it any better. So, but yeah, he didn't like what I did, and he was going to hold us both in contempt. And prior to him doing that, I kind of played the judge a little bit by before he issued his ruling. I stood up and I said, "Look, it's been a long trial. We all get caught up in the moment. I would ask that you not hold him." And I was talking about the prosecutor. "Please do not hold him in contempt.
Great.
He probably didn't realize what he was doing." Now, I was not doing it to save his ass. I was doing it to save mine. Because I knew if he held him in contempt, he was going to go right at me next.
Double technicals.
So, yes. So that's kind of why I took that approach. But yeah, no. You have to be aware. And he's not the first. I mean, I've seen other prosecutors act inappropriately. When they're so used to winning all the time,
right.
They really do get cocky.
We'll hear how the trial ends up in For the Defense next. I couldn't let this podcast episode go without playing for you the laughing guy clip from Jose Baez in closing. Here you go.
The 24th, he issues a police report and reports him missing. The 15th, she's reported missing. He doesn't say a word about this alleged argument. Remember the argument over the gas cans in the trunk of the car? Here's your fucking gas cans. Well, on the 17th, a detective goes and inspects the shed. He doesn't say anything about that. "Hey, by the way, I had this fight with my daughter. She wouldn't let me near the trunk of the car that smells like death. And here are the gas cans. Why don't you take them and fingerprint them?" He doesn't say a word about them. It's not until near August 1st that he tells them about it, and they collect it. And they take this photograph. Then the first week of August, he's photographed by the media inadvertently, and all of the duct tape's the same. We're not talking about fantasy forensics anymore. We're talking about cold, hard evidence. Evidence that points to one person, and one person only. And he could get up here and lie all he wants and dance around the truth, but the truth is the truth. And depending on who's asking the questions, whether it's this laughing guy right here or whether it's myself.
Objection. Approach the bench.
Some of the trial books that I've read have always talked about the jurors want to, the facts, of course, are important, but in a case where they can't decide, a lot of times they're going to rule for the lawyer they trust and like better. And in this case, when you bring something like that out in closing, that's been happening all trial, I don't think the jury can help but dislike the guy.
Yeah, no, they did not like him. They didn't like him anywhere near how much he liked himself.
Right. Well, that's true a lot of times of prosecutors, Jose.
Yeah. He was the media darling. They absolutely loved him. He was complimented left and right every day. On the way into the courthouse while we were waiting for the verdict, he was high-fiving people on the way to the courthouse before the verdict was read. It was interesting behavior, to say the least. And then later, after losing, he went off. He didn't even show up for the sentencing. He went out to New York and did the media rounds and signed a book deal and ended up becoming the elected prosecutor in Orange County after losing the biggest case of his career. So it just goes to show there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Especially for a prosecutor.
It gets even better. Subsequent to that, he got caught up in the Ashley Madison scandal. As the elected prosecutor, it was discovered he was, I guess, on Ashley Madison from the state attorney's office.
Oy.
And while being married, of course. And now I think he's a judge now.
Huh. I know he lost, right? One of the elections after that.
He lost re-election. Yes, he lost the re-election bid after the Ashley Madison scandal.
After Ashley Madison.
Yeah, so.
One question I have for you, Rabbi, is this, because a lot of people ask criminal defense lawyers, how do you defend those people? How do you represent those people? You represented Aaron Hernandez after being convicted of murder, Casey Anthony accused of killing her daughter. What's your answer to those people, at the cocktail party when they ask you that?
Well, I hate to answer it because it's such a idiotic question.
It really is. It really is.
It is because they say that from on top of a white horse, as if they've lived a perfect life themselves. The best way I can answer it without diving into too much detail, as you know, you kind of have to do when you get asked that question, and that is that I do this for two reasons. One, not everybody who gets arrested is guilty.
Right.
And there is shockingly a great number of innocent people who get charged and people who get charged for behavior that shouldn't be a crime. So, and then the trial becomes, was this a crime or not? Mm-hmm. Or was this the person who actually did it? So there's that. And then the other thing is I'm a big believer in I wouldn't be where I'm at if it weren't for second chances. And maybe second, third, or fourth chances in my life. But, and we're all greater than the worst thing we've ever done. We all have human dignity. And if you're not an empathetic person, you can't do this job.
That's right.
Sure. Trust me, I get frustrated with clients just as much as the next guy or gal. They can really get under my skin at times. But at the end of the day, I'm a human being. And I look across the table and I see a human being. I don't see someone less than human, which is what we do when people ask that question. You're basically saying,
go ahead.
You're actually saying that person's not human. That person's not worthy of human dignity. So that's why I hate answering that question.
It's one of the reasons I think prosecutors should actually have to be public defenders before they prosecute. I really believe that. I think the system would be so much better if every prosecutor went and tried cases as a defender for a year or two. I just think they would get the perspective of representing a person, a family who's sitting there watching, all this happen. It would, before they throw out, hey, put this person in jail for 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, I think it would help the system quite a bit.
Yeah, and life is complicated. Things are not black and white. We live in the gray all day, every day. And when it comes to these things, and when it comes to prosecutors, you become so judgmental, so jaded,
Yeah.
and they're not held accountable for their actions. Being a prosecutor is never having to say you're sorry, and that's the saddest part about our system, and that people don't realize is that they can make a mistake all the time, and they are never held accountable for it.
Right.
And not only that, they never want to admit they're wrong.
They'll fight and scratch to the bitter end that when they make a mistake. It's unbelievable. We've been going for a while. I want to get towards the end because you've been so gracious with your time. So you finish the closing. You go after Ashton, deservedly so. The jury goes out. How do you feel when the jury goes out? Are you confident? Are you scared? How do you feel in this case?
I had a strong feeling they were not going to get first degree murder because I felt the trial was going our way for a while. You wouldn't know it by what was going on, but we really kept the jury and the witnesses all focused on one thing: how'd she die? Where'd she die? When did she die? Okay, you say it was her, but where's the evidence that links her to this death that you don't know how it happened? And you can never talk. We have very few tools in our toolbox as criminal defense lawyers, but the ones we have, if you utilize them properly, they can be very powerful, such as the presumption of innocence, reasonable doubt. I make it a point during all phases of the trial to really bring that out in one form or another. During jury selection, opening statements, you're going to hear me talk about reasonable doubt. If I can get presumption of innocence or a reasonable doubt in cross-examining a witness or direct, I'm going to get it out somehow. And in closing, you're going to get a class on it. So, and then, the judge reinforces it with the instructions. So I am a big believer that sometimes we get a little too fancy and we lose focus of the main tools that you have. It's like building a foundation of a house. Don't forget the foundation. And if you forget the foundation, your house is going to get blown away no matter how nice it is.
So true. So true.
So always start there. You start with your foundation, then go ahead and get fancy. Then go ahead and you know what I'm saying? Then get creative and try to do the things you want to do in the case that are unique. But never forget your foundation. And I think a lot of lawyers, unfortunately, forget those aspects. I cannot fathom how, when I was taught as a public defender, teach, and then they came up with and then I hear these crazy things about some Ohio method or whatever. I don't know what that's all about, but I really think you have to stick to your foundation, utilize the tools that you have, and then always do something new. Keep your presentation of evidence fresh, never dull. I don't ever practice my openings or closings in front of my colleagues because I want it to be fresh. I know that that's something a lot of people do. When I'm saying it, I want it to come out as natural and as new as it possibly can. Of course, I do my outlines and I have certain parts that I might rehearse, but generally speaking, the very first time I do my openings or closings, they are before the jury. They're the first ones hearing it.
My wife would be happy if I didn't rehearse beforehand because she must hear my openings and closings like 50 times. She gets sick of it.
No, look, I know what works. I know what works for me doesn't work for everyone. So I get it. And everybody, and Ron Sullivan likes to say, because he and I teach at Harvard at the TAW, nobody can be a better you than you.
That's right.
And
exactly.
I think that's great advice from a great lawyer. And I would pass that on to all of your listeners too.
So Jose, the jury's out. You're feeling okay about it. They come back not guilty. I mean, unfucking believable. And how do you deal with that after? Do you go party? Do you celebrate? Is it somber with everybody? What happens after a win like this?
Oh my God, it was crazy. So here's the, let me see if I can take you guys to right beside me for a second. So I'm feeling decent. I'm like, okay, I feel pretty good about the case, but you never know. So I'm hearing not guilty, the first not guilty. And that was the one where their life or death was on the line. So it was important to me. I grabbed Casey's hand. And then the second not guilty, I squeezed it even harder.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third not guilty, that was it. The third not guilty was nothing left but misdemeanors at this point. And I never fought the misdemeanors. We never contested it. So those were here you go, gimmies. And by the third one, I squeezed her hand so tight I could hear her bones cracking. And then when it was over, we went in, we gave I wanted to be very brief with our press conference. We weren't going to do a bunch of victory laps or anything like that. And then we went to this place where we had lunch all across the entire time. And, that was, it was a relief. It was more like a long day after court, and of course the media was there. They made a big to do about it. Nancy Grace was talking about us having a champagne jamboree. I don't really know what that is, but so she said the devil was dancing tonight, and I thought to myself, no, that's when you were on Dancing with the Stars. So, but what you really have to hear is what I call the great escape. I don't know if we have time for that or not, but that's when we got her out of jail.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and I'll give you the Cliff Notes version.
No, tell us.
I knew I had gotten her out of jail a couple of times, and they kept throwing her back in with, to mess with us with these bad check charges. And I knew every time there's helicopters that follow us. Everybody's going to want to know where she's going when she gets out of jail. So I came up with this elaborate scheme to how we were going to utilize, how we were going to lose the media and the helicopters. And so long story short, I had 5 interns. I had a huge group of interns, like 6 or 7 of them from FAMU Law School. They were all great kids, and they all worked hard, and everybody really put in. So what we did was everybody put paper over their windows at the when we went to go pick her up.
Right.
And I had everybody waiting for us inside an underground garage. So we get her out of jail. We walk out under SWAT team supervision. And I hear everybody screaming like we were in a Justin Bieber concert. We get in, it was like unbelievable. They shut down the highway they gave us 3 minutes. They said, you're going to get on the highway. We're going to shut it down for 3 minutes, and you're on your own. So they did that. We get in the car, we go, and we drive straight to downtown Orlando, where there's this underground garage where all of my interns were waiting. So we get in the garage, and I tell Casey, okay, as soon as we get up to the 4th floor, I have one of our, so-and-so is going to be there, and we're going to get out of this car, and we're going to go into the other one. She goes, okay. So the next thing you know, I go, just come right behind me, and we got to do this quick. So we get out of I don't want to wait to the 4th floor. When I get to the 3rd floor, I see one of our interns there. I'm like, no, let's change the plan. Let's go with her. So we get in. I open the door, and then I'm in such a hurry. I have so much adrenaline going. I slammed the door behind me, and I forgot Casey's right there trying to get out. So I slammed the door on her leg, and she's like, ah! She starts screaming. And then the next thing you know, I basically, I pull her, and we grab in, and we run into one of the cars of my intern. And then that's when everybody starts leaving the garage. So we have 5 different cars exiting the garage and going in different directions.
It's like a movie. It's like a movie.
Oh yeah, it was. Oh, it gets better, David. It gets better. So we all leave, and helicopters, to their credit, the news helicopters all got on the radio and decided, okay, you follow that car, I'll follow this car, and you follow that car.
Sheesh.
Okay. We had a co-counsel, a civil lawyer, who had a plane, and we were going to fly her to not Panama, St. George's Island, which is just outside of Tallahassee on the Panhandle.
Okay.
I had known about it because I went to Florida State and I remembered vacationing there. I'm like, it's a nice little island on the beach. We rented a big house. The entire team was there. Half the team drove up already. So, okay. So the next thing is we're still trying. One of the helicopters is still following us. And we're like, shoot. And we drive for like 30 minutes and they're still on us. And we knew of a shaded tree area. And at that time, I said, we're going to switch cars. So I called one of the other interns for us to switch cars under these shaded trees. And that's literally how we did it. But then when we get back to the airport, I had no idea that the executive airport was the same place that the news helicopters refuel and keep their helicopters. So we went straight right back into the lion's den. And we literally had to wait till one of them refueled and went back up to run to the plane. We got on the plane, and here's where it gets better. They let her out at midnight. Okay, midnight, 1 a.m. Now it's 3 a.m. Okay, we hop on that plane. We go to St. George's Island. Well, St. George's Island has a small little airport, and guess what? It's closed.
Oh no!
So literally. I'm in the back with Casey and another lawyer, and they're like, hey, who's there at the airport? And I said, Dorothy's there. And he's like, tell Dorothy to go to the runway and turn on her lights so we could see where this is at, where the runway is. And I go, what? And he goes, just do it. So I go, okay. So I call her up and she goes to the runway, turns on her light, flashes them. They go, okay, we see the runway. And they're there, and I say, whoa, wait a minute. What are you doing? And they're like, we're going to land the plane using Dorothy's headlights. And I said, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, that's all I need. I could see the headlines tomorrow. Casey Anthony and her lawyer die in a plane crash the day she gets released.
Well, with the headlights, to shine on the runway.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And sure enough, he landed that plane like nothing. This guy would have made a great drug smuggler, I assume. Anyway.
what a great ending to the story. I love it.
So we finally landed. We ended up going to the beach house and we got our plan together there, and the rest is history. But I thought I'd kind of ended with that story.
What a great story, and what a great case, and just amazing how, the case really, puts you on the national spotlight for being such an amazing lawyer and having, after that, such amazing cases. It's obvious how much it affected your life, and, for the better, obviously. You're handling these great cases all around the country. And Casey Anthony's still in the news. I saw her last week in the news for starting an investigative agency.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me about her all the time, like somehow I adopted her. But,
Yeah.
the reality is, you move on to the next battle. I mean, there are clients that I have now that really need me, and my focus is always on my current clients. And while I love hearing from my old clients here and there, most of them just go on with their lives. And look, I know they appreciate the work, and I know they appreciate me, and that's a great feeling I have inside. But my commitment is always to the people I have now, and I'm really, really lucky. I mean, David, to be honest with you, I get so humbled. Most of my cases are out of the state of Florida. They're from all over the United States, and when someone from California calls me and says they want me to represent them, I'm humbled by it. By all the lawyers they have in California, they want to go all the way across the country and get me. It's an incredibly humbling experience, and I always try my best not to let them down, and to work just as hard and to reinvent myself. And I know I've said that earlier, but you always have to stay fresh and do, work at your craft. It's an evolving thing. It's not something that, if you're the same lawyer today that you were yesterday, you're letting yourself and your clients down.
Well, I just want to thank you for doing this. Thank you for all of the trial insights. I hope we can start trying cases again in 2021 because got to shake the rust off. And again, I just want to thank you, Jose. This was really, really awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome, and amen to that. Have a happy new year, and let's put that one behind us.
What an incredible story. Not only the trial itself, but Jose coming from being an unknown lawyer to being one of the most well-known and respected lawyers in the country. It's truly amazing, and it shows how trials, no one knows what's going to happen. Everyone had said Jose was going to lose this case and had no chance of winning, and he was criticized for how he tried the case, and he really had the last laugh. Not only did he win, he's won so many trials since. So big ups to Jose and where he was trained at the Miami Public Defender's Office. An amazing office, an amazing group of lawyers. I'll see you next week. This is David Oscar Marcus for the defense.